This is a C175 20-cylinder block in one of the three long block assembly workstations. Also in this workstation is a crankshaft, two cylinder pack carts, one for the left bank, one for the right bank. The process starts out by installing the camshaft bearings, followed by the camshafts. Once the camshafts are installed, the lifter cart comes over and the lifter covers are put on in sections of 5. Once the lifter covers are installed, the cylinder block is then hoisted up and put into the rollover fixture. Once it's in the rollover fixture, the cylinder block is rotated and the crankshaft is then positioned into the block. Once the crankshaft is in the cylinder block, the main bearing caps are then installed. Once the main bearing caps are installed, the threads are lubricated and the nuts are installed. The stud stretching group is then put into position and the studs are then stretched to their required specifications. At the completion of that process, the crankshaft is then checked for run out. The cylinder pack cart is then brought over to the cylinder block. The cylinder packs are then taken from the cart, the liner seal, rod bearing and guides are then installed, and the cylinder pack is then installed into the block. This process continues until all the cylinder packs are installed into the block. Once that is completed, the block is turned to its side and the block covers are then installed. Once the block covers are installed, the oil cooler group is then installed onto the block. Once the oil cooler group is installed, the block is rotated and the filter group is then installed. The block is turned further, the scavenge pump is installed, the scavenge lines and screens. The cylinder block is then turned back into position. The cylinder block then has the gaskets installed. The cylinder heads are then brought over in packs of 10 and installed onto the cylinder block. The hardware is then installed and continues this process until the cylinder head groups are all torqued into position. The long block is then moved from the long block area into the main assembly area. The fuel rails are then brought over and put onto the engine. Other subcomponents start to feed into this main engine assembly area. The rear housings, the front housing, as you can see here, the front housing comes in on a housing cart. It's on the same center line as what the block is in those stands. Once the front housing is on, then the turbo housings go on to the front housing. Other subcomponents start feeding in. Then they lift the engine and then they put the stands onto the front and rear housings. The oil pan is brought in on the assembly cart adjacent to the engine. The engine is then hoisted and moved over to the oil pan and lowered into the oil pan. The stands, when they contact the floor, leaves the oil pan approximately 1/4 of an inch away from the pan rails. The hardware is then installed and the bolts are then torqued up to their specifications. Once they continue assembling the engine, they add on additional subcomponents. Then they get and lift the engine and take it out of the workstation and start to mount it into the wheel system, and then it's taken off to the dyno room. The engine is now positioned into the dyno cell. The driveline is connected. The aftercooler package is then brought in to the engine and the connections are made in the air system. The water connections are also done. The engine is now pre-lubed with oil. It's pre-lubed to fill the crankcase and it is now ready for the dyno test.